I'm Carolyn Chapman. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU School of Medicine. I did my graduate training here at the Department of Genetics in Harvard Medical School, and it's a pleasure to be back, and it's very nice to be with all of you here today. So this session is on the ethical, legal, social implications of the GP Writes project, and I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of myself and my fellow panelists, Jeantine, Lunshof, Gigi, Gronvall, and Rob Smith, to thank the conference organizers for the opportunity to be part of the panel today. We're going to use this session to talk about ELSI work that's already been done by GP members and affiliates, and then we're going to talk a little bit about work that the advisory board plans in the short and long term. So it's been an honor for me to work with this advisory board. It's definitely a distinguished group, and I just want to point out that the backgrounds of the different members are quite interdisciplinary. We have lawyers, ethicists, philosophers, scientists, policy experts, and I think that when my fellow panelists come up, you'll sort of get a sense of the different perspectives that they bring. So this group has been meeting monthly from June 2017 through the present, and I also want to point out, since we don't have much time for the panel today, that there are sessions that were hosted by members of the board in both the May 2016 meeting and the May 2017 meeting, and those are available on the Center of Excellence for Engineering Biology website, and I encourage you to take a look at those. So the ELSI issues have been really recognized as being important and integral to this project since its inception. So in the 2016 Science article that's already been discussed, they had a number of statements that highlighted the importance of the ELSI issues, including statements that there should be equitable distribution of any early and future benefits from the project, that there was a commitment to the highest biosafety standards for lab workers, research participants, and ecosystems. We've already heard the leadership talk about how the project could encourage broad intellectual property access via patent pooling. And there were also acknowledgement that appropriate regulations, there may be gaps that the scientists would have the responsibility to lead recommendations if needed. And the paper also included statements about responsible innovation involving the identification of common goals, not only to the scientists, but to the broader public as well, and that and a recognition that timely and detailed consultation among diverse stakeholders would be needed. So Jeff has already referred to the SC 2.0 project, which can really be thought of a precursor to GP Writes, and he's also alluded to this statement of ethics and governance that was developed for that project, which was developed by Sliva, Yang, Buka, and Matthews and published in Genetics, and so you can find it there. But that statement of governance, which all of the members of SC 2.0 sign on to, included provisions on societal benefits, intellectual property, safety, and governance. And the GP Writes consortium, as we've heard already this morning, has, would like to develop a similar ethics and governance framework going forward. So in terms of ELSI work that's already been done, Jeantine Lunshof, who will join the panel shortly, and we'll hear from her, she's developed a model for interactive-based ethics by collaborating closely with scientists in the Church Lab. Her work is continuing and forms a model for others. I've started spending some time in the Buka Lab, and Jeantine's work has been highlighted in both academic and mainstream publications. And we'll hear a little bit more from her shortly. Okay, so what's planned in the future? The advisory board will review pilot projects in collaboration and with the scientific executive committee from an ethical and social legal perspective. And then the main thrust of the board's work is to identify and analyze ELSI issues that are raised by the GP Writes project and technologies, which again is a technology development project in scope. And the approaches that are planned are to continue the integrated bioethics approach, and also do secondary research, such as landscape reviews and possibly empirical research as well. Public engagement will be very important, normative and conceptual research, which will all lead into recommendations for both the framework that we've discussed, as well as policy recommendations at institutional, local, state, national, and international levels as appropriate. So the LC Board's mission, which is admittedly ambitious, will require sustained collaboration with GP Writes scientists, the working group members, and the broader public. And in this slide, I just wanted to frame out some classic bioethics principles and show how some of those questions relate to this technology development project, GP Write in particular. And really, although this doesn't look like an advertisement, it's our way of advertising the fact that many of the questions, the LC questions that are being addressed by the LC Advisory Board are also shared by other working groups and scientists. For example, we've already talked about some of the benefits of the project. The safety engineering group is looking at risks and minimization of risks. Intellectual property group is considering things that will impact justice and who benefits in terms of who benefits from the project and how, and who will bear burdens. And we need to look at that from individuals, organization, corporation, and society levels. We've already talked about autonomy in the sense that being concerned with cell lines having proper consent. And the public communication and education committees will are obviously focused on community consultation and public engagement. So here's our advertisement. We'd like today will be short, but we'd like to collaborate with everyone in the future months and years and throughout the day. So because I don't think that while the framework is necessary and useful for LC analysis, I don't necessarily think that it covers all of the LC issues that are associated with GP Write. And so while the technology development that the project is the mission of the project is exciting, I think it also, I think the power of it is also gives us some pause. And I think this is just meant as a conversation starter and hopefully maybe provoke some discussion. I think as humans, we all recognize we have many gifts, but we also have big responsibilities as stewards of the earth. And I'll just point out that 40 years ago or so, when the recombinant DNA era was born, scientists recognized the power of those technologies, and they gathered at Asilomar to discuss what should or shouldn't be done, and they came up with guidelines to guide the use of recombinant DNA. But at that time, they mainly focused on safety issues and left ethics issues for another date. And now that certainly the capabilities have come farther, and this group is pushing the boundaries even farther, I think I'll make the case that the time for ethics is upon us. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to my panelists, and then hopefully we're very hopeful that we have some time for questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to ask Rob and Jeantine and Gigi to join us.
So thanks. So I'm a social scientist. I work at the University of Edinburgh and a big part of this is working in collaboration with synthetic biologists in the Mammalian Centre for Synthetic Biology there. I think that there are, of course, big questions, and having some of the two of the community-wide projects that are kind of becoming more tangible now will really help us begin to dig into some of those. But I have three kind of more pragmatic and practical questions that I think are really important to address. So one of those is around public engagement. There are lots of calls for engagement and participation in genetic technologies and conversation around genome editing. Some of you might have seen two editorials that were published in Nature a couple of weeks ago, one of them from across the river in Cambridge. I think these are very good, but it's very important to think about outcomes, the motivations for kind of calling for these forms of engagement and what the community would really like to see here. The second is in terms of governance frameworks. So the SC 2.0 project is kind of seen here as a model to build on. And I think that's true. I think it's unique in that it's an international project. And so there are questions here are about, did the framework that was produced in support of that project really change the science that was done? Are there lessons here that could be learned from that framework moving forwards? And then the final one is just kind of seeing the interactions that are kind of building around the groups. There's a lot of crossover in terms of questions around IP, around standards, around interdisciplinarity and community building. And so I'd be really interested in hearing from the audience about whether there's a possibility to create, say, particular forums that could encourage information exchange and community development. So 3 questions.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here and to be part of this great panel. My role in this group is because of my background in biosecurity and also in policy development in the biological sciences. So these are obviously cross-cutting and integral to many of the other groups that are here today. So the same sorts of issues that were just expressed are doubly true for security issues going forward, to try to do what can be done to prevent misuse. So that is really, and I look forward to engaging with all of you today and in the future.
Hi, I'm Jeantine. I also really like being here with everyone today. I'm working on a pilot project within the GP Writes consortium. I must say that all of this is, of course, not formalized, and one of the reasons is that there is no dedicated funding for any work like this, which of course is a severe limitation, because in that way it always relies upon like other employers being willing to contribute. So the concepts in ethics in GP Writes, how does it work? And referring to what Carolyn said, that would be by sustaining the collaboration with GP Writes scientists, with other scientists, and with publics, as social scientists call the broader publics for good reasons, because it's not one beyond GP Writes. I think that is very, very important, and we have been confronted, I must say, with this aspect in the past in the GP Writes meetings, that of course those publics really do want to say something about the work that we as a community are doing, as you got from the earlier presentation here, this is high-level science. This is not easy to understand. We cannot assume that, say, the broad public, and it's also the people who are voting, the people who are paying taxes, the people who are, say, ultimately the decision makers about science policy, that they know what you folks are doing and what the importance is of this work. And it's also our responsibility to go into that discussion with them and to communicate. So to keep it simple, I would say, what is an important question to ask to each of this group? So to the scientists, the GP Writes scientists internally, our community, the other scientists and the publics. So the question would be, what big questions do you see related to the science in GP Writes? Next slide. Oh, that's very much, fortunately I have my little demonstration model here. So there would be building collaborative ethics. And at this point, I really want to shout out to the community in the consortium to please respond to our invitation to collaborate with the ELSI group. As you have heard, this is not only about ethics. There's biosecurity expertise. There is social sciences expertise in the ELSI advisory board, and we do want to work with you and we do want to work with you in a way that we respond to the questions that you may have. So please approach us and engage in that conversation, because we're willing to do that job. Next slide. It's about collaborative ethics and more specifically what a conversation would be. So as I mentioned, it's the big questions. So what's the big question for you with this very advanced synthetic biology work? Then there is a question about priorities. What should be addressed first? And everybody should be thinking about it. What should be addressed first because it's urgent, or because you feel that's a fundamental question? And I think at the moment that I saw Carolyn's last slide, that is the tree of knowledge, and that was basically, the sin of humanity. So for some people there might be such questions, and you should ask them, and we are available to talk about also such things if you'd like to. And then we should talk about the questions about the effects. Would it change your research? Would collaborative ethics, would it slow it down? Would it speed it up? Would it redirect or improve your research in any way? It is important for us to know that, what your expectations are and what you think about it, and what we could achieve collaborating together. And in order to extend this conversation, there is the open invitation now to have a discussion. Everything you ever wanted to ask people from the LC group, I will be available between 1 and 2 in the public space. So that means you do not need to have an idea to get in this secured research building. You do not need to have a ticket to attend this conference. But I will be probably in the cafeteria area. It's not a free lunch, bring your own lunch. And I'm open to any conversation that anybody would like to have with me and with my colleagues. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So if there's time, we'd like to open it up for questions and comments from the audience. So please.
Many of the goals listed on the LC table read as overall goals at a wide planning or oversight scale as a student. So can you think of examples of day-to-day decisions that scientists and students working on GP Write projects might face with a clear or direct LC sort of significance?
So I'm not exactly sure. Can you repeat the second half of your question? I had trouble hearing that.
Can you think of day-to-day decisions that scientists and students working on GP Write projects might face, which clearly connect with the questions and concerns that these members face or think of?
Let me just answer from the perspective of, there's been a lot of talk about dual-use science in the biosecurity world, and something that I always tell scientists they should be thinking about how they're, when you talk about your work, how it might be perceived from that angle. And as a scientist, you know the details, you know the challenges, you know all of the minutia that a person who is not in your world does not understand. But you have to think about how it sounds on the broader level, and people can get very upset. So it's worth it to try and think through how your work is communicated, and to make sure that not only are you keeping the potential security dimension in mind, but also how it may be perceived.
I think that I can add a little bit to that as well, maybe. So the extent to which this is specific around the more fundamental research that will be happening is unclear. I think we can think about other examples. But there's a really good example of when developing biosensors or technologies that are ultimately going to go out into the world and be used by people. There are technical decisions for example, around the kind of design of genetic circuits that you're making that can really affect how people interact with those technologies. So for biosensors, you can think of genetic circuits that are built to produce gradated outputs. And you can also think of ones that have distinct circuits and will produce distinct colors, perhaps, as an alternative. Those are non-trivial design decisions that you have to make fairly early on. They can affect things like the regulatory pathways that you move down. And they will ultimately have a big impact in the way that the people engage with the technologies.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think this is part of the SC 2.0 Statement of Ethics and Governance, but I think transparency is something that I think is really important. And I know, I've been spending some time with the BUCA group, and I think that welcoming and that commitment to transparency and sharing is, I think, also important from a day-to-day basis.
So I have a question for Gigi. This morning, when I read the newspaper, I read that there's some very ominous words from the Trump administration suggesting that Chinese graduate students and postdocs may be basically banished, as I read it. And, it was all about the invisibility cloak and, military research and so on. But there was some ominous wording in there that reading between the lines, I think it's extremely likely that they're talking about this project. So I wonder what your reaction was to that. And it's cutting edge technology. It can be applied in a lot of ways. You said the words dual use yourself. Do you think we are likely to be in that situation? Because I will say, as the SC 2.0 is concerned, if something like that happened, I think it would be devastating for the SC 2.0 project. Our Chinese partners played a leading role in this. They were the first international partners to sign up, and we've really worked phenomenally well together, and I just think that this would be a disastrous policy if it were to affect our research program.
So I'm going to have to, I was reading lots of other alarming things that came out of the news this morning, and I somehow missed that detail. So I will look at it now and take a look. But as in general, there are many things that should be nonpartisan, that should be something to increase U.S. competitiveness in the sciences that involve engaging with the outside world in a much greater way than we have. And I wrote, just to make myself feel better, a memo to the Trump administration. All my colleagues did, on what should be done for science policy and security in this administration. And that topic is in there, and it has not yet been taken up by this administration. But I'm going to look at that as soon as we break.
Does he have the legal authority to do anything on his own, or would it take an act from Congress or something?
I have a PhD in biology. I do not. I do not have a law degree, but I do know lawyers, and so I'm sure that this is something that we should be thinking about.
Any other questions? Oh.
Yeah, so since the original kind of secret villain meeting and the sort of media storm that followed that, have you guys had more recent engagement with, let's say, the non-scientific members of the general public and gauge their response to this overall initiative?
So I think that's planned. We're trying to work on that, and I know we're going to hear from the public communications group and education groups later today, so I think they've been working on that. I think also
I think the aim is to also start to do more publications, both in academic and mainstream publications, to keep the word. And you know, obviously, I think there are members of the press here to cover this, and so I think basically, you know, along the Andy Warhol lines, news is really great to raise awareness about what's going on. I also think that this group I think that the technologies have been moving so quickly, and that the public is still getting its hands around CRISPR, but that these technologies will take us even farther. And so I think there's still a knowledge gap with the public in terms of the capabilities that are not necessarily here today, but are going to be there tomorrow.
Maybe I can add to it that I think that the ways in which we as a whole consortium, but also as the LC group, could interact with the general public, that it's like widely underutilized, given, you know, the ways of communicating we nowadays have. And I think we should improve on that. And like my little sign is, of course, sort of like a practical joke, but I hope that you understand that it symbolizes the honest intention to broaden this conversation and to really give everybody access. And that must be an effort from our part to start with.
So Jeff, can you just tell us a little bit about the infographics you created for this meeting, which are designed to reach the general public?
Sure, yeah. So I am the moderator for the communications working group, and as you mentioned, I'll be presenting later, but just a quick preview. There are sort of two prongs to the approach. One is outreach to the media, but the second is also producing our own content to tell our side of the story, or to, you know, sort of make sure that regardless of what the media cover, that the GB Write puts the information that we want out into the public. And so as part of this meeting, we've commissioned 2 scientific infographics and some related graphics that are, you know, trickling onto social media throughout the day, which you can go visit the website under the resources page and check out for yourself. And these, like Nancy mentioned, are geared towards the general public to let them know what we're doing in kind of simple, accessible language. So absolutely, one of the capabilities that we're working on is building out this ability to tell the story and make sure that the public is engaged and aware.
And I just want to let everyone know there's a media and resources page that's been added to the website, and it has these infographics on it, so please look at them during the day. We'd love your feedback and comments to help improve them.
In case you couldn't hear that, on the website under media resources, you can look at all the content that was produced about the meeting today. I actually have a quick question. There was a recent article about sort of synthetic biology and ethics, and there were sort of 3 potential outcomes that might worry a bioethicist: terror, error, and success. So actually, you know, succeeding at one of these pilot projects at GP Write might itself present a threat in terms of these new capabilities. So I wonder your thoughts on how early LC should be involved in, for example, the community project decision-making process, or other projects that we decide as a community to pursue.
Do you mean community projects within GP Write or with the outside world? Within GP Write. Yeah, people should please respond to our invitation. That's like my main message today. And we cannot force ethics or social science or whatever upon anyone. So it should be felt as a need and as a wish to communicate.
Yeah, I would just add that there's been some really good work done in the UK which pairs social scientists and ethicists with scientific projects that are going on, and the a good way of working there is to fund collaborative workshops that unpack some of these questions. So questions around security, questions around intellectual property use, and it's a really good demonstration that the projects are taking seriously those questions. Usually you find that it's much more complicated than just terrorists are going to wipe out the world with a successful synthetic biology technology.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, but we look forward, as everyone has said, to further discussions and collaborations. Thank you.